Hello everyone, my name is Doug Hills and this is the Manga Studio Guide. Today I'm dipping back into the mailbag and answering a few questions from you, the Manga Studio user base. We have a few things to cover here, so let's dive right in. Mick has two questions for me. First one, is there a way to have the eyedropper act like it does in Photoshop, where you get a heads-up display of the color you're actually selecting before you make the selection? Now Mick is referring to this color sampling ring that appears around the eyedropper tool and has been around for the last few versions of Photoshop. There isn't an equivalent option to the sampling ring in Manga Studio. However, you still can see the color you're sampling by looking at the color swatches on the tools palette. While you drag along the picture with your eyedropper tool, you can preview the color you want to select. You won't get the current color to compare it to like the sampling ring apparently does, but at least you'll be able to drag the dropper along the screen to find the specific color you're looking for. Next, he asks, is there a way to configure the grid lined by percentage? I'm trying to add grid lines only for the rule of thirds when I'm setting up my composition. It's not possible to change the grid by percentage, but thanks to one of the newer features in Manga Studio 5.0.5, it is possible to create your own rule of thirds grid using the basic rulers. There are two ways to go about doing this. The simplest method is to first select the figure ruler on the ruler's subtools palette, make sure it's set to rectangle, and then bring up the subtool details window. Under Create Ruler, I select the Scale checkbox, select equal divisions from the drop-down list, and set the number of divisions to 3. Then I draw a rectangular ruler on a clean layer. You'll notice that the ruler has marks that split the sides into 3 equal parts. And these are the marks that I'm going to use to draw in my grid. Switching to the Direct Draw tool, and starting at each mark, I draw in my interior grid lines. Then, I draw in the outer border, though technically this is an optional part. And there's my rule of thirds grid. Now let's say I want to have a rule of thirds grid that I could grab from the materials folder and adjust to fit any scene or frame I'm working on. Using a combination of the figure and linear rulers, I could create my own rule of thirds ruler. First, I select the figure ruler, switch to rectangle, and create a box on a clean layer. Next, I switch to the linear ruler, open up the subtool details window, check the scale checkbox, set equal division, and change the number of divisions to 3. Then, I draw 4 rulers within the box, 2 horizontal and 2 vertical. I select each ruler with the Object Select tool, and I reposition them until they intersect one of the dividers of its perpendicular counterpart. For accuracy's sake, I tend to zoom in to at least 100% to match the rulers up and resize their lengths until they intersect the edges of the box. Once that's all done, I select the newly created grid by clicking and dragging a box around all of the rulers with the Object Select tool. On the Layers palette, I select Show in All Layers so that this grid will be visible on all layers on the canvas. From the main menu, I select Edit, Register Image as Material. I enter in a name, like Rule of Thirds, select the location I want to save it in, and press OK. Now, whenever I need to place a new grid on the page, I go to the folder where I place my ruler, select Rule of Thirds, and click the Paste button. And to adjust, I just click and drag all of the rulers with the Object Select tool, and then transform it to the size and shape that I need. And from there, I can either draw in a grid along the rulers, or I can just turn Snap to Ruler off and keep it up there as a guide. John asks, I watched your video on 3D models in Manga Studio. Can you add 2 models to a project and adjust one camera for both objects? Yeah, you can, although it does require a slight workaround. With the character models like the school kids here, I can click and drag any of them to the canvas and they will be placed on the same layer. With the drawing dolls, it doesn't quite work the same way. I can't drag one doll onto the canvas and then a second one. What I can do is this. Select the model, copy, and paste. And then I click and drag the Move Object button here and voila! 2 models. And I can repeat this process as much as I want, though I am limited to the particular gender model currently on the layer. So with this female drawing doll, I can only make duplicates of a female drawing doll. I can't change the duplicate into a male doll, for example. To get around that limitation, I come down here to the character poses, select one of them, and drag it onto the canvas. And there it is. Depending on where the model ends up placed on the layer, I may need to reposition it. While I could use the Move Object button like I used earlier, I instead move over to the Tool Properties palette, expand the Object Scale option here, and then use these sliders to reposition the object with a little more control. And there we go. Now there's one thing to keep in mind with this workaround. Dragging a pose only creates male drawing dolls on the layer. So if you wanted to have a mix of male and female dolls, you're going to need to add a female doll first, then drag a pose to add your male doll. Nick asks, I need to learn how to make a lightsaber in Manga Studio 5EX. Any easy glow tips? Since Manga Studio doesn't have the same kind of glow filters that Photoshop uses, here's a method I came up with to hopefully achieve the same effect. And this can be done in both 5 and 5EX. First, I draw a linear ruler on a clean layer. Next, I select the main color that I want to use for the lightsaber, select either a pen, marker, or direct drawing tool, set the width I want the blade to be, and then draw along the ruler. Next, from the main menu, I select Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I use the slider to adjust the strength and size of the blur I want applied to the blade. Then I press OK. Next, I select a lighter color, or in this case I'll select white, make the size of the brush smaller, and then draw along the ruler. And this creates the core of the blade. Then I apply a second Gaussian blur, this time a little weaker than the first one. And once I'm happy with how the blade looks, I select the linear ruler, move it out of the way, and eventually delete it. JJ asks, is it possible to use a vector as a repeatable background? Unfortunately, no. Unlike raster lines, which are essentially painted pixels, vectors are mathematical paths that are used to calculate a line, curve, or other shape you're creating on the canvas. While a vector drawing can be registered to materials, the program is not designed to take that same drawing and all of those paths and apply it as a repeating pattern. That all said, raster patterns are essentially image adjustment layers, so the quality of the image will remain fairly consistent should you choose to resize it on your page. If you create your initial drawing at a high enough resolution, it should scale nicely to whatever size you need. Finally, Cameron asks, what would be the best way to make slightly rough, uneven panel borders in Manga Studio 5? Can I make a polygon box shape that's sort of uneven and gritty? Well, as far as creating an uneven shape, I would either use the polyline frame tool and use that to plot out a jagged or crooked border, or to go even crazier, I would draw in one freehand using the frame border pen tool. Now, if a box frame is already created, I can change how it looks by first selecting it with the Object Select tool, and then clicking and dragging either the frame sides or corners to change the general shape. Then I add additional control points by going over to one of the edges, right-clicking, and selecting Add Control Point from the pop-up menu. And I repeat this process as much as I want to achieve the new frame shape. Now, to change how a border looks as I draw the frame, I head over to the Tool Properties palette and I scroll down to Brush Shape. Clicking on the drop-down list, you can see there are a variety of brush styles available, from pen and pencil to ribbons and musical notes. I want to create something brand new, so I'm going to click on the wrench icon to bring up the advanced options and click on the brush tip list. Instead of circle, I click on material and then I click here to bring up the brush tip list. I'm going to select the bloodstained tip and press OK. Adjust the thickness a little bit of the border, set the brush direction to random so that the pattern randomizes as it's drawn along the frame border, adjust the brush stroke a little bit, and then I come back to brush shape and select register to preset. I click on the wrench icon to change its name, and I'm done. Now when I draw in the frame, using any of the frame tools, I select the new preset from the list, and once it's plotted out, there we go. One irregularly shaped frame with a gritty blood-stained border. And you can change any existing border by selecting over the Object Select tool and then selecting your new preset from the brush shape list on the Tool Properties palette. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode and thank all of you for a wonderful 2014. This has been a fantastic start to this new series of Manga Studio Guide videos, and I could not have done it without the moral and financial support of all of you out there. So here's to a fun, creative, and educational 2015. This episode of the Manga Studio Guide was brought to you by Patreon supporters like the ones you see here. Thanks very much, guys. If you would like to help me keep this series running, you can subscribe for as little as a penny per video through Patreon, or you can purchase books, rulers, page templates, or just throw some money in the tip jar at my online store. Thank you all very much for watching and for your support. Happy New Year, and I will see you next time.